If you agree that true heroes don't need recognition to keep doing what's right, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story will remind you that courage doesn't always come from uniforms or medals. Sometimes, it comes from the quiet one standing watch when no one else is looking. They said she was just the girl who fed the strays. That's what the sergeant called her as he passed by the checkpoint that morning, half amused, half annoyed. "You keep feeding those mutts, Clark, and they'll start saluting you next," he joked. She only smiled faintly, crouching beside the rusted gate, pouring water into an old mess tin as 3 mangy dogs circled her boots. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, a pale stripe of light bleeding across the distant hills, catching on the faded checkpoint sign that read, Outpost 17, Restricted Zone. It wasn't much of a post. 2 prefab huts, 1 communication tower, and a rusted barrier that rarely saw traffic anymore. To most, it was a place the Army had forgotten. But for Maya Clark, 28, it was exactly where she needed to be. Every morning, she arrived before anyone else, before the trucks, before the shouting, before the world started demanding explanations she didn't know. She'd sit on the sandbag wall with her thermos of coffee, eyes tracing the horizon like she was searching for something that hadn't yet decided to return. No one at the checkpoint knew who she really was. The few who asked learned nothing. The posted ID said civilian logistics, and the younger soldiers figured she was some charity worker or contractor on assignment. She didn't correct them. It was easier that way. What they saw was a quiet woman with tied-back hair, worn boots, and the habit of scribbling in a leather-bound journal when things got too loud. What they didn't see were the scars beneath her sleeves or the calloused steadiness of her hands, the kind that came from years of holding a rifle instead of a pen. It was Private Ellis who noticed first that she moved differently. When the alarm siren test went off that morning, most flinched or ducked instinctively, but Maya didn't even blink. She just looked up toward the speakers, her expression unreadable, her body perfectly still, like she'd already measured the distance between every sound and every echo. "Doesn't that thing make you jump?" Ellis had asked her once, half joking, half curious. She'd glanced at him, a hint of amusement flickering in her eyes. "Only if it's real," she said. He didn't know what that meant at the time, but he'd remember it later. The soldiers didn't hate her, but they didn't understand her either. They called her Checkpoint Angel, a nickname that started as mockery and somehow turned affectionate. She patched uniforms, brewed strong coffee, fixed the old generator more than once. But mostly, she fed those dogs, 3 of them, Scout, Shadow, and Rex. No one knew where they came from. They just appeared one winter, scarred and half-starved, and she never let them go hungry again. Sometimes, when the night shift changed over, the men would see her out there kneeling in the dust, whispering softly to them as if they were soldiers themselves. "Perimeter check, boys," she'd murmur, and the dogs would dart along the fence line before curling up near her boots. It was strange, almost ritualistic, but no one questioned her. Something about her calm made even the most skeptical ones hesitate to laugh too loud. That morning, she was writing again. The others thought it was poetry, but if anyone had looked close, they'd have seen grid coordinates and radio frequencies filling the page. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, military. Every line told a story she wasn't ready to share. The radio on the desk beside her crackled faintly, a hiss of static swallowed by wind. She paused, tilting her head slightly, listening. Not like someone waiting for a call, but like someone who could already predict one. Lieutenant Howard came stomping out of the hut, coffee in hand, barking about shift schedules. "Clark, those dogs are going to set off the sensors again. You know that, right?" he snapped. Maya didn't answer immediately. She was watching the far ridge, her brow furrowed just slightly. "They won't," she said finally. "They know the boundary better than we do." The lieutenant scoffed. "You talk like they're trained." She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Maybe they are." To most people, Outpost 17 was nothing but dust and boredom, a dead zone between one forgotten supply route and another. But Maya Clark treated it like sacred ground. She kept logs of every vehicle that passed, noted wind direction, cloud cover, even temperature draughts. She didn't have to. It wasn't her job. But every soldier posted there began to notice that when she was on shift, things ran smoother. Radios didn't cut out. The generator didn't die. Even the old motion sensors behaved. Some joked she was good luck. Others weren't so sure. Private Ellis once asked her why she never went home. She had looked at him with eyes that seemed older than her years. "Home's wherever someone's still watching the gate," she'd said softly. He didn't press further. Something in her tone carried too much weight to question. By late afternoon, the air turned dry and heavy, carrying that strange electric scent that comes before a storm. The dogs grew restless, pacing the perimeter. Maya noticed before anyone else. "Weather's changing," she said quietly. The sergeant laughed, glancing at the clear sky. "Looks fine to me." She didn't argue. She just stood, brushing dust from her knees, eyes fixed on the northern ridge. Then came the faint pop of static from the comms tower. The lieutenant cursed, slapping the radio, assuming it was just interference. But the sound came again, sharper this time, 3 bursts, evenly spaced. Maya froze. Her head tilted slightly, her pulse steady but her posture shifting. The air changed. The kind of stillness that soldiers recognize right before something happens. She stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "That's not interference," she said. "That's a signal." Before anyone could respond, the radio on the desk came alive with a piercing crackle. The voice that cut through was clipped, military, unmistakably official. "Major, we've got movement." Every head turned. Silence gripped the outpost. The lieutenant blinked. "Major," he repeated, confused, scanning the faces around him. Maya stood perfectly still, one hand resting on the edge of the desk, the other gripping the strap of her satchel. Her eyes narrowed toward the horizon, as if she could already see what the others could not. The radio hissed again. "Do you copy, Major Clark?" Ellis's mouth fell open. "Clark?" he whispered. But Maya was already moving. Not in panic, not in shock, just quiet certainty. She picked up the handset, pressed the button, and spoke for the first time in the tone of someone who had commanded men through chaos. "Copy. This is Clark. Confirm your sector." Her voice dropped the softness, carrying the unmistakable cadence of rank. The lieutenant took a step back without meaning to. The men exchanged glances. For the first time since she'd arrived, Maya Clark wasn't the quiet woman with the notebook. She was something else, someone they hadn't realized was standing among them all along. Outside, the wind began to rise, the storm finally gathering. The dogs bristled at the fence line, eyes fixed on the ridge. The young private felt his chest tighten as he turned to Maya. "Major?" he asked softly. But she didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the darkening horizon, her hand gripping the radio tight. And as thunder rolled across the valley, she spoke again, steady, unshaken. "All units, stay sharp. This post is active." That was the first time anyone at Outpost 17 realized the woman who fed stray dogs wasn't just being kind. She was waiting, watching, guarding something none of them yet understood. And by the time they did, it would already be too late to laugh. The storm hit faster than anyone expected, sweeping across the barren hills in sheets of gray that blurred the horizon. Floodlights flickered once, twice, then steadied under Maya's hand as she rerouted the circuit manually, moving with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times before. No one dared question her now. The lieutenant who'd once mocked her stood frozen beside the radio, unsure whether to salute or stay out of her way. "Movement confirmed." Came the voice again through the static, tense and rapid. 5 heat signatures near Sector Delta. Pattern looks coordinated. Maya's eyes narrowed. "Delta's the drainage path," she murmured, mostly to herself. "They're testing response time." She took the binoculars from the hook and scanned the ridge, her jaw tightening. Through the rainfall, faint shapes darted between outcroppings. Quick, practiced, deliberate. Not civilians. Not lost travelers. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. She began issuing orders quietly, each word precise. "Ellis, kill the outer lights. Sergeant, redirect the patrol to the south wall. Don't engage until I say." Her voice carried no panic, just command. The soldiers moved without hesitation. For the first time since she'd arrived, no one saw a checkpoint volunteer. They saw a leader. "Major," Ellis whispered under his breath, realization settling like gravity. She cut him off gently. "Keep your eyes on the ridge, Private. They're not here by accident." Inside the hut, she spread a map across the table, marking the positions from memory. 3 years ago, she said quietly, this sector went dark for 17 minutes. An ambush. My team didn't make it. Her hand hovered over the exact ridge they were watching now. This is where it happened. The lieutenant swallowed hard. You were on that team? Maya nodded once. I led it. The room fell silent except for the rain hammering against the tin roof. The dogs outside began to bark, a low, guttural warning that rolled through the storm. Maya stepped out into the rain, unflinching. The wind whipped her hair loose, her eyes scanning the ridgeline as lightning cracked overhead. Hold positions, she ordered into the radio. No shots fired until visual confirmation. Seconds later, the figures appeared again, moving closer, but then, abruptly, they vanished. The motion sensors blinked red, then green. Nothing. The radio sputtered once more. Major, targets withdrew. No breach detected. Maya exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. They were probing us, she said, turning back toward the men. Testing for weakness. She wiped the rain from her face and added softly. They didn't find any. The lieutenant finally found his voice. How did you know what to do? She looked at him, expression unreadable. Because I taught them how to attack posts like this once, she said quietly. And tonight, I stopped them from doing it again. As dawn crept through the clouds, the storm eased, leaving the ground soaked and the air heavy with silence. The soldiers stared at her in awe, at the woman who'd once been invisible, now standing at the center of the checkpoint, like she'd never left the field. Maya lowered her gaze, watching the dogs settle again by the gate, tails still twitching, alert even in rest. Good work, boys, she whispered. Same time tomorrow. And as the last echoes of thunder faded over the hills, every soldier at Outpost 17 understood. The stray dogs weren't the only ones guarding this place. Maya Clark had been standing watch all along. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the checkpoint washed clean and eerily quiet. Mist clung to the ground like a ghost that hadn't decided whether to leave. The men moved slowly, still processing what had happened, eyes flicking toward Maya every few seconds as if afraid she might disappear again. She stood by the gate, her coat damp, the dogs pressed close to her legs. When the first convoy arrived from base, it wasn't a supply truck, it was a black SUV, the kind that carried rank. Out stepped Colonel Avery, followed by two aides in pressed uniforms. His eyes landed on her instantly. Major Clark, he said, his voice clipped, a mix of disbelief and something that sounded like relief. The younger soldiers glanced at each other, realizing the truth they'd only half believed. Major, one of them whispered. But Maya didn't salute. She simply nodded, her tone calm, steady. It's been a long time, sir. The colonel stepped forward, his expression hard to read. We thought you were gone, he said quietly. We closed the file. What are you doing here? Maya looked back at the gate, the ridge beyond it glinting under the weak sun. Finishing the watch, she said. There were still gaps in the line. The colonel's gaze softened just enough to show understanding. He turned to the men. Do you know who you're standing with? No one spoke. This woman led Operation Claylight, he said. The mission that stopped an entire insurgent wing before it reached our border. She's the reason any of you have a post left to guard. A heavy silence settled over the group. The lieutenant who had once mocked her lowered his eyes. Private Ellis straightened unconsciously, as if trying to match her posture. The dogs barked softly, sensing the shift. Maya gave a faint, tired smile. I didn't stay for medals, she said. I stayed because some of us don't get to move on until the ground we fought for is quiet again. She crouched to stroke one of the dogs, her voice soft. They were here that night. They survived. Someone had to keep feeding them. The colonel hesitated, then extended his hand. You're welcome back, Major. Full reinstatement. Your record deserves closure. But she shook her head. It already has it. Her gaze moved over the checkpoint. The sandbags, the antenna, the weary faces now filled with respect instead of dismissal. They'll hold the line now, she said. My job's done. She turned, picking up her journal from the desk, the pages still damp but intact. Then, with a quiet nod to Ellis, she started walking down the dirt road that led away from the outpost. The dogs followed close behind, their paws silent in the mud. When the sun finally broke through the fog, it caught the edge of the checkpoint sign. Someone had already taken a paintbrush and, with uneven but careful strokes, added a single line beneath it, Clark Post, for the major who never stopped watching. Weeks later, new recruits would be stationed there, told stories about the mysterious woman who once guarded the ridge alone. Some would say she'd been a ghost from another war. Others swore they'd seen her silhouette at dawn, standing with 3 dogs just beyond the fence line, scanning the horizon. Whatever the truth, one thing endured. At that lonely checkpoint, every soldier learned the same quiet lesson she left behind. That real duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It lives on, quietly, faithfully, in those who refuse to stop caring. And for Major Maya Clark, that was enough.